Okay, now we're going to continue with Pleistocene glaciations and you, numero deux. We're going to continue with a discussion on how the Pleistocene glaciations occurred, their influence on the Earth's environments, and ultimately their influence on us, how the Pleistocene glacial periods made us what we are today as humans. So here, just for fun, we have a rather European, Mediterranean-looking guy standing next to the modern bison, North American bison here. You can see that compared to the modern North American bison, the ancient North American bison was a much bigger critter. As we talked about in the last episode, Kroll and Milankovitch suggested that Pleistocene climate was controlled by an orbital clock. Kroll first proposed this. Milankovitch came along as a much superior mathematician and firmly established the periodicities in the Earth's orbit as being 18,000 years, 21,000 years, 23,000 years, 41,000 years, 58,000 years, and 100,000 years in periodicity. Now, one of the things I didn't mention last time is that the 100,000 year eccentricity periodicity is what's believed to be controlling on a large scale the Earth's climate. So it forces us between glacial episodes. Glacial episode followed by an interglacial like we're in now, subsequently followed by another glacial that is supposed to start right about now. Okay, so the problem is this 100,000 year clicker represents a very small perturbation in the amount of insolation the Earth receives. So the biggest changes are occurring at 100,000 year intervals approximately, yet that 100,000 year perturbation is one of the smallest. This is known as the 100,000 year paradox. The biggest things happen when forced by the smallest things. Doesn't make sense, therefore maybe this whole orbital clock thing doesn't work. But that's a topic for a longer course about orbital forcing. The approximate timing of human migrations is listed here, and by approximate, I mean really approximate. I offer this class about every 3 years or so, and every 3 years times change completely, and I mean by a lot. So the radiocarbon dates change, the marine sediment records can change. Mostly what we see are changes in our archaeological record. So the fossil record of us as humans begins around 7 million years ago with species discovered in Chad, in North Central Africa, and what today is a pretty deserty kind of environment. This was considered one of the great discoveries of all time. At about 4.5 million years ago, a number of species of ape-like creatures that were becoming bipedal and using stone tools are known from the record in Africa. One of my former postdocs was involved in this somehow. He's on one of those papers with 50 or 60 authors. So I'm not sure what he did as far as the discovery is concerned, but Antoine Zazo is the name, and I think we'll hear from him again in this course. So about after 2 million years ago, the first human-like species appeared. This species is known as Homo ergaster. This was the first human species to spread from Africa, ultimately making it to Asia by about 1.6 million years ago. By about 22,000 years ago, all species of humans had become extinct, with maybe the exception of the little people of Asia, the Hobbit people, by some. And you can check that out in the Hobbit file that I posted. A little bit more of an explanation. Homo erectus begats Homo heidelbergensis. This is a fossil that was originally discovered near Heidelberg, Germany, hence the name heidelbergensis. This species ultimately became us, but there were a couple of bumps along the way. Homo ergaster had at least 2 evolutionary descendants, Homo erectus in Eastern Asia and Homo heidelbergensis in Africa. Homo heidelbergensis spread to Europe, ultimately evolving into Neanderthals and Denisovans, as well as Homo sapiens. The Neanderthals ultimately moved to Europe by about 560,000 years ago. In 2008, Russian archaeologists from the Institute of Archaeology and Ethnology in Novosibirsk were working at the site of the Denisovan cave in the Altai Mountains of Siberia. They found the finger bone of a small human that they named X-Woman. Artifacts, including a bracelet, were excavated in the cave at the same level. They were dated to much younger than this until recently. Now the dates are 51,000 to around 76,000 years before present. This is a depiction of a young girl and her father based on genetic evidence. We're now good enough at the genome work that we can determine hair color, skin color, eye color, height, weight, and even pre-dereliction to good and bad habits. I was invited over to Novosibirsk to the Institute of Archaeology and Ethnology in 2009, I believe. Maybe it was 2008. And I was brought over there, this is Novosibirsk here, to give a talk on Vikings, what caused the disappearance of the Vikings in Greenland. And after my talk, I figured I'd do something exotic and travel to a strange place. So I took a night train ride south, basically along this route on the Ob River. Went through Barnaul and Bisk, and the train ends here in Bisk. So I was picked up by a car, and we headed further into the unknown. So it all started here with the train station in Novosibirsk. Travel in Russia is interesting. Travel in Siberia is even more interesting. So the Russians are being proud of their country like everyone. Asked me if I was going to travel around Russia at all after the meeting. And I said, well, sure. And they figured I was going to Moscow, which I did. But before then, I wanted to get out in the wild. So I told them where I was headed, and they all laughed. Everyone I mentioned it to laughed. And finally I said, what's so funny? They said, you speak no Russian. You have big adventure. Okay, so I did have a pretty big adventure. Hop on this train. This is the Novosibirsk to Bisk route. These windows were last opened probably in 1953 when Stalin passed away. Pretty hot, pretty Russian-y train. I shared a tiny berth with 3 Russian soldiers who were on weekend leave. We stayed up all night drinking vodka and telling broken stories in Russian and German. The goal was to get to Bisk, which is located here, and take a car further south along the Katun River to a place called Chimau, which is located pretty much in between Siberia, Kazakhstan, China, and Mongolia. So you're really in the heart of it all here. And this was the view from my window. This is in Chimau. This is the Cyrillic spelling of Chimau, Chimau. It's located on the Genghis Khan Trail, also known as the Goat Path. This was the Silk Road that humans used for thousands of years. All the important stuff that was traveling between Europe and China for thousands of years went along this pathway. And you can see it's a real trail in some locations. Along the way, I saw this statue of a bear either feeding the sun to an alligator or ripping the sun out of the alligator. Nobody knew what this statue represented. This place is remote enough that they speak Altai instead of Russian, which I don't know any of. But some little kids sang me some Easter songs in Altai, and they gave me a picture of Jesus. And we talked about the Russian Orthodox Archbishop of San Francisco, who they assumed I knew because I was American and I went to San Francisco. So we ended up in this cave. This is the Desanova cave of the Republic of the Altai. And you can see some petroglyphs here. This is the sort of a side view of the opening to the cave. And so we crawled into these caves, Olga here, in the dark, in the mud. And eventually I said, well, I've been in a lot of caves before, so we don't have any flashlights. We can't see anything. I've got the experience behind me and we can move on. Little did I know that this is one of the most important archaeological sites in the world. And little did they know, because the discovery was made at about the same time we were in here. So again, we're down here in the Altai between Kazakhstan, Mongolia, Siberia, and China. And again, this has been an important place for thousands of years. It's important for us in this story because the cold climate around here increases the survivability of DNA. It can last for a long time if the average annual temperature is about 0 degrees. caves remain at the average annual temperature. So basically, we're at the temperature of a modern freezer. The analyses of these remains discovered in the cave, which, by the way, was named after a Russian hermit named Dionysus. So this hermit gave his name to this cave, which ultimately gave a name to a new group of humans that we didn't know existed until 20 years ago. So it's believed that Neanderthals and Denisova had a common ancestor, which was somewhere between Ergaster and Heidelbergensis about 1 million years ago. The mitochondrial DNA evidence suggests that this species came out of Africa. Post-African migrations associated with Neanderthals and modern humans turns out to be distinct from the earlier African exodus of Homo erectus. So these people were moving throughout the same areas, but not in association with each other. So the discovery of this distinct branch indicates that we are still learning quite a bit about our evolution as critters. Also found in this cave were Neanderthals and modern humans. Teeth from and toe bone belong to different members of the same population as the girl reported earlier, the first ex-woman. Now, it showed that this DNA was distinct from Neanderthals and modern humans. So this is a third group of humans occupying the same region at approximately the same time. Now, subsequently, this genome has spread from far Western Europe to Spain and to Southeast Asia. So in the far Southeast in Asia and Australia, we find modern humans to contain about 6% of the DNA of Denisovans. Modern Southern Europeans have about 4%, 2 to 4% Neanderthal. So in reality, they are still with us. They're not really extinct. Some of our characteristics are Denisovan and some are Neanderthal, if you're of European extraction. If you're right out of Africa, your family, your ancestors haven't lived anywhere other than Africa, then you should not have any Neanderthal or Denisovan DNA. So inbreeding with local Neanderthals made up about 17% of the Denisovan genome. And in fact, just recently, an individual was discovered that is a hybrid from a Neanderthal mother and a Denisovan father. I think that was the way it went. Each parent was a different variety of human. And as I mentioned a minute ago, some of this material, this DNA indicating Denisovans, is found in 400,000-year-old remains in Spain. And here we see just a depiction of the Altai Mountains, again running from Siberia, Kazakhstan, China, and Mongolia. This is where these three groups of humans came together at the same time. Now, what can we learn from our Neanderthal genome? Neanderthals, the Denisovans, and Homo erectus all ended to one degree or another. But while they persisted, they lasted for several 100,000 years. They lasted through some crazy Pleistocene, glacial, interglacial climate changes, and they were successful while they were around. Just so happens at the end of the last glacial period, these people became more successful than these people. Now, we can tell about the musculature from attachments of the muscles to the bones. We can tell how big their muscles were. From the genome, we can tell hair color. We can tell the characteristics that can lead to eating disorders and schizophrenia. Smoking status, whether a person is likely to become addicted to smoking. We can derive that from the genome in a modern human, and we can trace it back to the genome in the Neanderthals. And skin tone or color, mood and sleeping patterns, these are all things that we can derive from the genome, as well as susceptibility to certain types of chronic disease. Again, here is a map with the distribution of humans and approximate timing. This timing is approximate, and it will change probably by next year. Just for fun here, this is the bridge that leads into Kazakhstan. This is how you say hello in Kazakh. Salametchiba. Salametchiba. More recently, another group of people, in this case modern humans, left behind some significant archaeological sites in the permafrost. Now, fortunately for them, it's permafrost. Unfortunately for them, these mounds that they built to bury important people were covered with stones that you can see for miles away. If you pop up on any one of these mountain ridges and look off in the distance, you can see these mounds of rock. They all contain burials, which contain valuable archaeological materials. Just a close-up here. We have petroglyphs of them hunting reindeer. This is the Katun River Valley. Again, a very important valley throughout modern human history, going back 20, 30,000 years or so. That's what I mean by modern in this case. Again, we see depictions of animals and hunts and things like that. I had a strange connection to this valley that I did not know about at the time. And it gets back to the last glacial episode. So we go from what we all think of as the Pleistocene, the icy cold period, even though climate today is pretty much like it was around 123,000 years ago, maybe just a little bit cooler. So we've been through this before a number of times, as we saw from the last lecture. This cold period lasted from about 118,000 years ago to 15,000 years ago. And again, it was the most recent in a long series of maybe 20 of them or so. But it was during this cold period that Homo sapiens, modern humans, left Africa, spread throughout Europe, Asia, and finally the Americas. In doing so, they forced the premature end to the other groups of humans. So for most of our time on Earth, modern humans have lived in colder, drier environments than today. Global warming is nothing new for people. Previous humans experienced warmer periods, like maybe 125,000 years ago, and cold periods. It's expected that we're going to go back into a cold period again unless we mess with the atmosphere significantly to the degree that we prevent that from happening. But the world's population generally during the last warm-up went from around probably 50 to 100,000 people to billions of people in the last 15,000 years or so. So until the last ice age, the last glacial episode, much of the world was uninhabited by humans. Humans moved into the central Russian plains around 25,000 years ago, and to the Americas at the earliest, about 20,000 years ago, maybe a little bit later, maybe like 14,000 years ago, or it may have been around 130,000 years ago, based on Dan Fisher's work on a mastodon site in Southern California. You remember him from a couple of lectures ago. He was the one that tricked me into eating a rotten horse from a pond in Michigan. So his work in California suggests that this number of 20,000 years ago is way off, meaning 100,000 years too late. So during the Ice Age, many lakes and inland seas in temperate and lower latitudes were numerous, much more numerous, and much, much larger than they are today. These lakes appeared and persisted because of shifts in the rainfall belts that are related to the position of the jet stream. That goes way back in the beginning of the class in atmospheric circulation. The circumpolar vortex shifts positions, and with it, the storm tracks shifts positions, and with that, the precipitation shifts position. So more rain, less evaporation because of lower temperatures means more water. The Caspian Sea in Asia is twice as large as present. Lake Chad in southern Sahara, where those fossils were found from 7 to 4.5 million years ago, was as large as the present Caspian Sea. So somewhere around 12 years ago, I submitted a sample to National Geographic, the Genographic Project. And this basically consists of taking a swab from your cheek and submitting that sample to them. They analyze it for a genetic code. They match it to other genetic codes around the world and provide you with a rough history of your family's movement as they evolved. So in my case, the Proto-Pattersons left Africa around 45,000 years ago, traveled through the Middle East, left Iran around 40,000 years ago, and eventually worked their way over into the region we've been talking about in southern Siberia at the juncture with Kazakhstan, China, and Mongolia. After spending 10 or 15,000 years in the region, we became the M231 haplotype, and that haplotype left this area around 16,000 years ago at the end of the last ice age, or the last glacial of the ice age, and traveled north and east So essentially, as the ice was clearing and melting to the north, the vegetation was following, and the Pattersons were following that vegetation and animal change. So ultimately, we ended up here in Scandinavia. This is something that was a surprise to me. And we spread our culture. So this is back in the Katun River Valley in Siberia, one of the graves that was recently uncovered. Again, because these rocks are piled on top in a nice dome, you can spot these graves from a very long distance, and that leads to grave robbing. This is the type of thing you recover from these graves. They built these caskets or tombs in kind of a log cabin style, and you were buried with significant grave goods, which included horses with all of their horse gear, livery, stable gear, various pots, pans, weapons, clothing, etc. These are all becoming less common in the Altai now because so many have been excavated, but there still are a few surprises here and there. This is a recent excavation, the excavation of a person known as the Ice Princess. And what you'll see here is a copy of a pictograph depicting two people hitting each other on the head with spiked axes. And we recover individuals from these graves with holes that match these spiked axes. Clothing that's recovered includes these very fashionable jackets and high boots, long pants. These are made out of animals, various animal skins. And ultimately, these people, once they worked their way up into Scandinavia, maintained pretty much a similar lifestyle. The woolly mammoths were gone that they ate in Siberia, but they still had the reindeer to rely on. And to this very day, the Sami, the local people here, mostly in Finland, but also in Norway and Sweden, live this nomadic lifestyle. They herd reindeer to this day. These are photos from recently. Well, this is about 100 years old or so. But again, they maintain this lifestyle. So, when I tell my friends that apparently my ancestors were woolly mammoth hunters and reindeer herders, they didn't seem surprised, which kind of surprised me. Today, this is the type of dwelling you might see in the forest in Siberia. These are modern homes. They're not reconstructions, so people are living in these dwellings to this day. This is a tick warning. Watch out for ticks. They carry a variety of diseases. In this case, they carry encephalitis at this time. In North America, west of the Mississippi watershed, we saw a lot of large lakes, very, very large lakes, as big as the Great Lakes today, present all over the West. And the one depicted here is Lake Bonneville. Lake Bonneville used to cover about a third of Utah. Now it's shrunk down to the Great Salt Lake, which is still a very large lake, but only about 10% or so the size of the original lake, Lake Bonneville. This lake spread out from where the present Great Lake is located to about the size of the present Aral Sea, and had a depth of around 1,000 feet. Other lakes in the same region include Lake Lahontan, which was about half the size, 25,000 square kilometers, in Nevada, and it stretched into Searles Lake in California and down to close to the Salton Sea in Southern California. I don't think it was ever directly connected to Lake Tahoe except through the Truckee River, which still runs from Lake Tahoe into what's known as Pyramid Lake today, up here. So these lakes remained into post-glacial times as long as there was some ice covering much of Canada. This is modern-day Pyramid Lake. We're collecting a water sample. This is about 10 years ago. So this is my field assistant here getting a sample. And I'm up here trying to get my motorcycle out of the sand dune. About 300,000 years ago, Homo sapiens evolves in Ethiopia. This new species behaves differently, leaving records of art. They have rituals they engage in, and they leave us some record of that. And they have a whole new technology. They have lots of ways of dealing with the natural world that are brand new. And it's believed this is due to a more creative mind. Now, Neanderthals had larger brains than modern humans, but maybe we did more with that smaller brain that we have now. And ultimately, our species wins. We still contain remnants of the other species, but for the most part, we're new, and we're the best. Okay, by about 30,000 years ago, Homo sapien was found through Africa, all over Europe, much of Asia. They made it to Australia. They made it to Tasmania. The radiocarbon information that we have from Northern Australia, which I'm most aware of, indicates that these people arrived around 40,000 years ago, maybe 50, maybe 60,000 years ago, but for sure they were present in Australia around 40,000 years ago. It's thought this is related to the lower sea level that provided a land bridge from Australia to Tasmania and Australia to Asia. So in that sense, the Ice Age, the buildup of ice on the continents, led to lower sea level. The cold climate led to easier travel.